At 6:17 local time, the morning haze still clung to the sunflower fields east of the river when two German-built Leopard 2 A6s rolled past a splintered bus stop and into a killing ground. The commander of the lead tank, call sign Atlas, tapped the rim of his headset twice. The gunner's thermal sight bloomed with white-hot shapes that didn't belong to the landscape. Far ridge, heat signatures stacked like roof tiles, engines idling, turrets at 12 o'clock. A Russian vanguard had chosen the obvious road. Atlas had chosen to be waiting on it. The battle net was music made of discipline. 6 syllables per report, no wasted breath. 2 T-90, 3 T-72, BMPs in trail. Range 3.6. The second Leopard, Hector, eased left into a shallow hollow, angling its hull 30 degrees off axis. The driver rode the clutch. The loader cracked his knuckles. The commander's independent panoramic sight, gyros whispering, hunted for glass glints and the faint flicker of drone props. He found both. At 6:18, Atlas depressed the L/55 and let the first DM-63 fly. The gun recoiled like a door slamming on a bad decision. One of the T-90Ms on the ridge tried to pivot. It pivoted into a jet of sparks. The round slipped under the contact bricks, bit the glacis, and exited where the turret pretended to be thickest. A puff of black, then a flower of flame, then a hat of smoke as stowed charges turned the crew compartment into a forge. In Soviet lineage turrets, ammo isn't a passenger. It's the driver. When it cooks, it doesn't simmer. It leaves. Hector waited half a second for the mirage to settle and then shouldered another target, a T-72B3 nosing down the slope. Gunner, sabot, on! Metal screamed at 1,700 meters per second, struck the lower front plate, ricocheted into the driver's world, and brewed the tank from the floor up. A hatch pinwheeled skyward. You learn fast or you learn never. When crews cram extra rounds under the floor to keep the carousel fed, any mine or underplate hit can turn an armored fist into a bonfire. The Russian brigade's spear didn't break. It bent, then wobbled. BMP-3S fanned to the ditches. BTR-82 as slewed into the orchard for flank fire. A tube artillery battery 3 kilometers rear spat its first angry punctuation. Overhead, an Orlan loitered like a nosy landlord, and somewhere behind the ridge, a Lancet team began hunting for pixels that looked like tanks. Atlas popped a bank of multispectral smoke. The grenades coughed a gray wall shot through with glitter, metal flakes to frustrate optics, and laser rangefinders. Shift left 2 lengths, the commander said. The driver felt the tracks dig. The gunner already had the next solution. BMP in hull down, turret peaking like a swimmer for air. DM-11, heat MP slid into the chamber. Impact, a thud and a sudden emptying, like air leaving a room. The turret stopped being a shape and started being scrap. The Russian BTR-82AS did exactly what doctrine told them. Spray and pray and keep moving, and exactly what experience should have warned them never to do. Challenge a 120mm from the side of a field. They fired first. The Leopards answered. The difference between first and finished was 2 seconds and 8.3 kilograms of brisant chemistry. If you've ever watched a Bradley shred a BTR with 25mm and wondered how lopsided that duel looks at ground level, multiply the effect by 5 and add a shockwave. At 6:21, the Orlan finally saw enough through the smoke to earn its paycheck. A pixel streak. Missile launch from a tree line. ATGM, right 40. Atlas's commander slapped the loader's arm. Smoke, right, reverse, neutral, steer. The driver carved the hull around its own footprint as the missile arrowed into the last coordinates where a Leopard had been. It met dust and temper and nothing else. Hector punished the offender with HE frag through the tree line. Branches flew, a launch tube tumbled. Someone's morning got very quiet. The ridge began belching more armor. Reserve company. And the first 2-blade minlets started peppering the road like metal dandelions. We need the long gun, Atlas muttered. DM-53/63 is a conversation ender against frontal arc at this range, but only if your sight picture doesn't melt under thermal clutter. The commander split the difference, sliding his sight into pure white and forcing every engine block to glow like a confession. On the right, T-90. Turret ring. Send the gunner sent. The T-90 paused in that tiny way machines do before they admit defeat. Then, it admitted. The brigade commander, somewhere behind a map and a radio and an optimism he hadn't earned, ordered the push. He still believed the contact was a screen. 2 tanks couldn't gut a vanguard. 2 tanks couldn't be that fast, that coordinated, that cruel. He was wrong on all counts. 0624. Counter battery fire walked across the fields like a drunk trying to find his car. Cluster sub-munitions hissed. The Leopards soaked the rain on their roofs and answered with mobility. One rule of heavy armor: don't be where the map says you should be. Atlas crept forward into a shallow defile. Hector leapfrogged into a barn shadow, his driver threading between collapsed rafters that still smelled like hay and last summer. Drone, high, dropping. The loader's voice went up a notch, not in panic, but in urgency that made panic unnecessary. The quadcopter was small, the grenade smaller, but gravity is undefeated. Atlas's commander punched the Galix panel again. More smoke, plus a quick squirt of the turret's cokes to spray the sky with tracers. The grenade fell into the smoke plume and detonated in a harmless tantrum. If you've watched FPV and drop munitions chew through thin top armor and ignite stowed propellant through engine decks and open hatches, you know how close this was to being a funeral. Hector's commander watched the smoke tear and saw movement. A T-72 trying to use the dead ground on the left to flank. Driver, pivot left, 5, gunner, cokes, suppress, loader, heat. The T-72's commander got greedy, showing more turret than the geometry allowed. One shot. The ring seized. The turret froze at a weird angle, like a question no one wanted to answer. The second shot, heat, center mass, answered it anyway. For 30 seconds, the battlefield turned into a lecture in combined arms gone wrong. Russian infantry dismounted without drone cover, found themselves blind in a field watched by two cats with thermal eyes and paid for the ticket. Mortars tried to fill the gap. Smoke tried to be an argument. Artillery tried to be law. But law without enforcement is just ink, and enforcement was two 60-ton judges trading sentences at 4 rounds per minute. At 6:27, the first Lancet made its appearance. Sleek, whining, hungry. The operator had clearly done his homework. He came in low, used tree lines and power poles to break the line of sight, then popped up for a terminal dive on Hector's turret roof. The crew heard it, felt it, almost tasted it. The commander detonated smoke and the driver booted reverse. The loiterer committed and found plywood, not armor. Hector had parked under a sagging shed awning for exactly that reason. Turn a top attack profile into a bad angle and a worse day. The Lancet split the wood and missed the cat. Atlas punished the launch area with a programmable airburst that showered the hedgerow with supersonic persuasion. When the leaves stopped falling, so did the telemetry. Ammo state, Sabot 6, Heat 4, Multi 5. We've got 2 minutes to be legends and 10 to be survivors, Atlas's commander said. Dry as a desert. The loader laughed in one syllable and slammed another round home. If this feels like a myth about 2 tanks stopping a brigade, it's because wars write myths out of math. A Russian brigade in this sector wasn't a parade book full strength. It was combat-worn companies with more radios than radios that worked, more vehicles than vehicles that ran well, and enough artillery to be terrifying at distance, but clumsy at touch. Break the spearhead, kill 3 or 4 tanks, shred the first BMPs, crater the road, spook the drone operators, and the rest is momentum bleeding out on gravel. 6:29. The ridge spat fire again. A fresh T-90M appeared where the smoke made silhouettes lie. Atlas, engaged, missed high across the turret cheek, no one is perfect, and corrected. The second round struck just low enough to bite the ring again. The turret rocked, then remembered gravity. Somewhere, a cook-off thought about being catastrophic and decided against it. The crew bailed, smoke trailing, alive enough to be unlucky later. Hector took a hit, not in the soul, but in the skin. A 30mm burst walked across the side skirts from a BMP that had snuck into a ditch. The spall liners caught what the plates didn't. The driver swore in a language that didn't need translation. On him, the gunner said, already slewing. The BMP tried to back out and discovered rear gears are not a defensive system. One heat to the upper front plate turned the engine compartment into a lightning factory. The rest of the vehicle learned about heat transfer the hard way. The brigade commander finally committed his reserves and his pride. Push, 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 he barked into a net that sounded like gravel. His artillery officers plotted fire that would have been devastating 5 minutes ago and merely scenic now. His drone team searched for cats that were constantly somewhere else. His tankers understood, with that bone-deep sensibility crews get when the geometry is wrong, that pressing forward without air, without ECM, without flanks, meant dying on schedule. At 6:32, the Leopards did something that doesn't make headlines because it looks like nothing. They repositioned again. Not a dash, not a retreat. A 5-length drift to fresh ground, trading shot holes for clean dirt, Angles for armor, probability for advantage. Tanks survive on millimeters and seconds, and respect for boredom. Moving before the enemy finishes, a thought is how you stay alive long enough to finish your own. Atlas, contact, close. A T-72 burst from the dust at 900 meters, over-eager and under-lucky. The Leopard's gun never shouted. It just spoke in the same measured clinical tone it had used all morning. The round hit high, the turret bucked, and the tank folded into itself like a bad magic trick. If you've watched month after month of footage where small drones turn big tanks into bonfires and wondered whether heavy armor still matters, consider this stretch of dirt. 2 well-handled Leopards, each with 4 souls inside, just denied a brigade its plan. Tanks aren't obsolete. Tanks without eyes, ears, infantry, air defense, and humility are obsolete. The war has already proved it 100 ways, from Bradley's outranging BTR-82 in brutal snapshots to FPV grenades snaking through hatches and cooking charges in turrets that were never designed for the sky to be hostile. 6:35. The Russians tried one last idea, the kind you get when doctrine is out of ideas. Smoke, lots of it. Then a flood across the low ground with engines pegged and commanders standing half exposed in cupolas like it was 1987. It almost worked on the map. In reality, smoke is as honest as wind, and the wind wasn't on their side. Thermal didn't care. The Leopards saw hot rectangles moving fast in dumb lines. They cut again. They cut until the ridge ran out of courage. Somewhere behind all this, somebody's staff officer would write later that enemy armor elements were assessed at company strength. He would be wrong in an important way. Enemy armor elements were 2. By 6:41, the brigade was no longer attacking. It was leaving, not in a rout. There were still guns, still noise, still reasons to say orderly withdrawal in a report, but the geometry had flipped. The Leopards didn't chase. Chasing is for cavalry on sunny days. Leopard crews on long mornings let the enemy leave, then leave themselves. They backed into the orchard, tracks whispering, engines throttled down to a purr that sounded like relief. The loader finally exhaled loud enough for the intercom to record it. The commander shut the sight's iris and blinked red lines off his retinas. The gunner flexed his right hand and discovered that his grip strength had been holding the whole machine together. Ammo? Sabot 3. Copy. We're done being heroes. Only afterward, when the crews traded water bottles with the infantry platoon that had spent the fight flat in a drainage ditch calling out bearings, did the ledger feel real? Burnt metal where a T-90M had been convinced of physics. A toothy BMP canted on its side with its tracks still trying to walk. A line of BTRS abandoned in panic. Hatches open like excuses. The road pockmarked by cluster bomblets that decided not to be bombs. The shed roof blown off Hector's head by a lancet that had learned about plywood. The field told a story, and it didn't need subtitles. If you strip the morning of its hype, you're left with a handful of plain sentences. 2 Leopards used hunter-killer optics, disciplined gunnery, smoke, and constant micromaneuver to slice the tip off a larger force. They avoided top attack kills by thinking in 3 dimensions. They denied artillery by refusing to be still. They punished rash flanks with heat and stiff fronts with long rod AP. They let combined arms chaos crush an opponent who tried to do combined arms by rote. Infantry late, drones late, artillery later, everything loud and nothing smart. And when the enemy finally did the predictable thing, push, 2 crews turned the map into a maze and the maze into a morgue. And the lessons? They're not new, just newly obvious. A tank's value is exponential with the quality of the crew and the timing of the plan. A brigade is just atoms if you stop the nucleus, and ammo stored like a secret under the floor or around the turret ring will betray you the moment a penetrator asks the right question. Hours later, a UAV would pan across this field for social media, and someone in a comment thread would say the obvious thing: no way 2 tanks did that. He'd be right, but not for the reason he thinks. 2 tanks didn't win a battle, 2 crews did, with every soldier on their net pulling threads tighter than the enemy could cut them. The tanks were just the knives. If you prefer your wars clean and mathematical, the log reads like this: 6:17, contact; 6:18, first kill; 0:621, ATGM defeated; 6:24, drone attack foiled; 0:627, loitering munition neutralized; 0:629, counterpunch; 6:32, reposition; 6:35, assault blunted; 6:41 enemy withdraws. The gaps between those timestamps contain the only thing that really matters. 4 people per tank making good decisions faster than the other side. We romanticize steel. We should probably romanticize checklists. You can argue doctrine and procurement and logistics in the comments. Crewmen know the truth is simpler and meaner. Keep your head on a swivel, your sight clean, your loader fed, your driver happy, and your gun cold when it should be and hot when it must be. Respect drones like they're snipers you can't see. Move like artillery is always watching, because it is. And when the ridge coughs up a T-90M and dares you to flinch, remember, the round is already in the breech. The rest is muscle memory. By late afternoon, the field belonged to no one, which is another way of saying it belonged to whoever came back first with engineers and stretchers. The Leopards were a kilometer away, under trees, oils cooling, barrels swabbed. The crews wrote quick notes the way air crews do. Ranges, bearings, oddities to check later in maintenance. One commander paused over his notebook and, without looking up, said softly into his intercom, "Next time, bring friends." No one disagreed. Because even on a morning like this, especially on a morning like this, the professionals know that alone and head-on is a stunt, not a tactic. It's an extreme case that works when the other side gives you every advantage you ask for and a few you forgot to request. It's proof of nothing except what 4 people can do when the math is briefly on their side. And still, if you were on that ridge in the smoke and heat at 6:18 when the first T-90M's turret tried to flee its own hull, you wouldn't be arguing doctrine. You'd be looking for reverse and a prayer. Sometimes that's all a legend is. 2 tanks, 1 road, and a lot of men who didn't want to find out what the 3rd round would do. Bye for now.